She slammed the hammer down so hard the anvil rang out like a gunshot, and still nobody turned to look. Not with respect. Not anymore. In the summer of 1883, in the sun-baked town of Fairfax, Texas, a woman's strength was her greatest sin. Nora Vaughn had arms that could bend iron and a heart that had never been held. This is her story. If this story moves you, subscribe and follow along to the very end and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this journey travels. Nora Vaughn had been awake since before the sun. That was nothing new. She'd been waking before the sun since she was 11 years old, when her father first pressed a hammer into her hands and said, "Hold it like you mean it, girl." She'd held it. She'd never stopped. By the time the first pale streak of July light crept over the flat Texas horizon, Nora was already at the forge, coal burning hot and orange sweat rolling down the back of her neck. The summer of 1883 was the driest in memory. Even at dawn, the air in Fairfax sat heavy and mean, pressing down on everything like it had a grudge. She didn't mind the heat. She'd learned to work inside it, same as she'd learned to work inside everything else this town threw at her. Her hands moved the way hands do when they've done the same thing 10,000 times, certain, quick, deliberate. She was shaping a gate hinge for old Pete Cassidy out on the Flat Creek Road, a simple job she could have done in her sleep. And for a few minutes before the town woke up and remembered to have opinions about her, it was quiet. It was almost peaceful. Then she heard it. 2 voices. Women. Coming up the boardwalk just outside the open front wall of the forge. "She's in there already. Lord, can you imagine? I walked past yesterday, and she had her sleeves rolled all the way up. It's indecent. Frank says she's got arms bigger than his. I believe it." A pause. Then quieter, but not quiet enough. "No decent man is ever going to want that." Nora brought the hammer down. The clang of iron against iron swallowed whatever came next. She didn't need to hear it. She'd heard it before, different words, same song. She'd been hearing it since she was 16, and the forge became hers to run alone since her father died and left her the only blacksmith in Fairfax. 14 years of that song. You'd think a person would go deaf to it. She hadn't gone deaf to it. She set the hinge aside and worked the bellows feeding the fire. Her jaw was tight. She made herself loosen it. That was the discipline nobody ever gave her credit for. Not the strength in her arms, but the strength it took to stay quiet. To keep working. To not walk out onto that boardwalk and say what she actually thought. She was 25 years old, and some mornings she felt twice that. Fairfax was not a large town. It had a general store, a saloon called the 2-Bit that smelled like old wood and cheaper whiskey, a church that the Reverend Ames ran like a small kingdom, a post office that doubled as the telegraph station, and 3 streets of houses that all looked like they were thinking about falling down, but hadn't quite committed. Out past the south edge of town, the Broken Creek Ranch ran cattle across about 400 acres of dry grass. And it had Nora Vaughn's forge, which was the only one for 30 miles in any direction, which was the only reason the town tolerated her at all. She knew that. She'd known it a long time. She did good work. Better than good, her ironwork held when other smiths' work cracked. Her hinges swung clean, her horseshoes wore even. The ranchers knew it, the farmers knew it. Half the men who smirked at her behind her back brought their horses around when they needed shoeing because they didn't trust anyone else. That was the arrangement. She made their world function, and they made her life small, and everybody pretended that was just how things were. She'd stopped waiting for it to change. The sun had climbed maybe 2 hours above the horizon when she heard boots on the threshold of the forge. She didn't look up. She was working a bracket for the feed barn on Miller's property. The man had broken 3 of the store-bought ones in a single season, which told you something about how much feed his operation moved. She was halfway through shaping the second bracket when the boots stopped. Usually people announced themselves, said her name, or said Miss Vaughn, or cleared their throat like they were embarrassed to be there. She was used to the embarrassment. Men who needed her didn't always like needing her. This person didn't clear their throat. "That's good work," the voice said. She looked up then. He was standing just inside the threshold, hat in both hands. The kind of man who took his hat off when he stepped into someone else's place of work. That alone was worth noticing. He was tall, built solid across the shoulders, with dark hair that had grown a little long and a jaw that hadn't met a razor in about 4 days. His clothes were trail-worn, not dirty, but used. Like he'd been traveling and hadn't been anywhere long enough to air them out properly. He was looking at the bracket in her tongs, not at her arms, not at her face, at the bracket. "Thank you," Nora said, because that was the civil thing to say. She set the piece back in the fire. "You need something." "Hoping so." He took a half step forward, still holding his hat. "Name's Tyler Quinn. I just signed on out at the Broken Creek. Foreman out there told me the shoe on my roan came loose on the ride in and said you were the person to see." "He's right about that." She wiped her hands on her leather apron. "Bring the horse around to the side. I'll take a look." "Already tied her there." He nodded toward the side wall. "I didn't want to interrupt while you were mid-heat." She looked at him a moment. Most people walk their horse straight through the front tracking dirt across her swept floor because it didn't occur to them to do otherwise. She didn't say that. "I'll be done with this bracket in about 10 minutes, she said. "Then I'll see to her." "I appreciate it." He didn't move to leave. He stood there, turning his hat slowly in his hands, looking around the forge like he was actually interested in it. Most people who came in saw a hot, dark room and a woman who made them uncomfortable. He seemed to be looking at the tools hung on the wall, the coal bin, the water barrel, the 2 anvils. "You shoe horses yourself?" she asked. She didn't know why she asked it. She didn't usually make conversation. "Some. Did a fair amount of it up in Colorado. Nothing like this." He nodded at her setup. "This is a proper operation." "My father built it," she said. "I've added to it." "What did you add?" She almost didn't answer. Then she said, "Second anvil. Bigger post-vise. Rebuilt the bellows rig about 3 years ago. The original one was inefficient." "You rebuild it yourself?" "Who else would have done it?" He looked at her then, and for the first time she got a clear read on his face. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't uncomfortable. He looked she didn't have a word for it right away. Genuinely interested, maybe. Like what she'd just said was exactly as interesting as any other piece of information and not strange at all. "Fair point," he said. She went back to the bracket. His roan was a good-looking mare, red as autumn, with a disposition that told Nora she'd been handled by somebody patient. The shoe on the left front was indeed loose. 1 nail pulled 2 more working free, the shoe starting to shift. Another 10 miles on rough ground, and it would have been a real problem. "She's been rode hard," Nora said, running her hand down the mare's leg. The horse turned her head and looked at Nora with large, dark, entirely unbothered eyes. "Long way from Colorado," Tyler said. He was standing a few feet off, not hovering, giving her room to work. "What brought you to K-Fax?" "Job. The Broken Creek was hiring a friend of mine, wrote me about it. I figured a change of country was past due." She pulled the loose shoe, cleaned the hoof, checked the frog healthy, no bruising. She'd have the horse reshod in less than an hour. "The Broken Creek's a decent spread," she said. "The Harker family runs it straight." "That's what I was told." She worked in silence for a few minutes. She could hear him breathing steady, not impatient. Most men shifted their weight, checked a pocket watch, made some comment about how long this was going to take. He just stood there, easy, like he had nowhere to be, and didn't mind waiting. "You been smithing long?" he asked after a while. "All my life, near about." "You enjoy it?" She glanced up from the hoof. "What kind of question is that?" "Honest one," he said. He didn't look apologetic about it. She considered. "Yes," she said. "I do." "Good." He put his hands in his pockets. "I've done jobs I didn't enjoy. It eats at you. What jobs were those? Some cattle work that wasn't honest. I left that behind. She didn't push further. It wasn't her business. She went back to the hoof. But she noted it. A man who could say in plain words that he'd done dishonest work and left it was a man who'd thought about it. That took something. She nailed the new shoe, checked it, ran her hand along the mare's leg one more time. Clean. Good. She straightened up. What do I owe you? Tyler asked. She told him. He paid it without comment, without the little pinched expression some of the ranchers wore when she quoted her prices like they resented paying a fair rate because the person they were paying was a woman. He just counted the coins out and put them in her hand. I appreciate it, he said. She rides better when she's sound. Bring her back in 6 weeks, Nora said. I'll check the seat. He nodded, gathered his hat from where he'd set it on a fence post, and swung up into the saddle. The mare moved out smooth under him. He was already turning toward town when he stopped. He looked back at her. Tyler Quinn, he said again, like he was reminding himself to be clear about it. I'll likely be in town regular. It's good to know who does real work here. Then he touched the brim of his hat and rode off. Nora stood there a moment longer than she needed to. Then she went back inside and picked up her hammer. She heard about it at the general store the next morning. She'd gone in for coal tar and a box of nails early enough that she thought she could get in and out before the morning crowd gathered. She almost managed it. Miss Vaughn. That was Dorothy Hale, wife of the man who ran the hardware side of the store, a woman who had made an art form out of being pleasant and unkind at the same time. Did you hear the Broken Creek took on a new hand? Rode in yesterday. Nora said. She was reading the nail gauge on the box. Good-looking man from what I understand. The Harker girls were talking about it. Dorothy set her hands on the counter. I do hope he adjusts to K-Fax. Sometimes newcomers don't know quite what to expect from our particular characters. Nora set the nail box on the counter. I'll take 2 pounds of coal tar as well. Dorothy smiled her careful smile. Of course. Nora paid for her things and left. She stood outside on the boardwalk and let the July heat press down on her for a moment. Particular characters. 14 years. She'd been here for 14 years. Born here, raised here, buried her father. Here kept this town's iron held together through drought and hard winter, and a cattle sickness that took 3 ranches almost to their knees, and she was a particular character. She picked up her parcel and walked back to the forge. She fired the coals and picked up where she'd left off on Miller's brackets. She was not going to think about Dorothy Hale. She was not going to think about Tyler Quinn's voice when he said, "You do real work here," like it was a plain fact and not something that needed defending. She brought the hammer down. He came back on a Wednesday. She was working a hinge order for Reverend Ames, 6 pairs, for the new side doors on the church, which apparently the previous hinges were insufficient, for which was not her problem, since she hadn't made the previous hinges. She was on the 4th pair when she heard the boots. She knew them already. Even stride unhurried. Tyler Quinn, she said without looking up. Miss Vaughn. There was something in his voice she couldn't name it yet. Not quite amusement. More like appreciation, like he was surprised to be recognized by sound alone. You got a good ear. I pay attention. She turned the hinge in the tongs. What do you need? Gate latch for the north pasture. The old one, sheared off Harker, says it's been failing for a year and a half, and the hand before me kept patching it with wire. Wire patches a latch about as well as it patches anything else. She set the hinge aside and reached for her measurements ledger. What gauge is the gate? He told her. He knew the measurement exactly. Not all of them did. Half the ranchers who came to her could only describe a thing by pointing at something else and saying about like that. He'd measured it before he came. She wrote it down. 4 days. That works fine. He didn't leave. She looked up. He was holding something. A wrapped piece of brown paper, small like something from the store. He set it on the edge of the workbench, the clean edge not where the coals tracked dust. Bessie from the bakehouse sent this, he said. Peach pastry. She was selling them off the counter, and I thought... He stopped. Like he was second-guessing the logic of it, now that it was out in the open. You were working when I came by yesterday morning. I figured you probably didn't stop for breakfast. Nora looked at the wrapped paper. Bessie sent it, she said. I bought it, he said. Bessie didn't know who it was for. There was a silence. I don't need you buying me breakfast, she said. Her voice was level. She kept it that way on purpose. No, he agreed. I reckon you don't need much from anybody. That wasn't why I did it. Then why? He looked at her straight. Because you were working while everybody else was sleeping, and that seemed worth acknowledging, that's all. She didn't say anything for a moment. She picked up the paper parcel and set it on the shelf behind her out of the way. 4 days, she said again. Come back Thursday. He touched his hat and left. She did not eat the pastry until she was done with the hinge work 2 hours later, when the forge was empty and the street outside was quiet. It was good. The peaches were ripe, and the crust had held its shape even wrapped. She ate it standing up over the workbench, and did not let herself think too hard about why that bothered her more than almost anything else that had happened all week. Tour. On Friday, the two-bit saloon happened. She didn't go in there. She never went in there, not because she was afraid of it, but because it wasn't worth the performance. A woman walking into a saloon alone in Fairfax, Texas in 1883 was an invitation for commentary she didn't have the patience for. She walked past it most evenings on her way back from the forge, and she kept her eyes forward, and that was that. That Friday evening she was coming back later than usual. She'd stayed to finish a repair job that ran along a broken wheel rim for one of the Cassidy wagons brought in that afternoon, with 3 days' urgency attached to it. She'd done it in one. She was tired and her shoulders ached, and she was thinking about nothing but a cold supper and sleep. She heard the laughter from the open door of the two-bit before she was level with it. She would have walked past. She almost did. Nora Vaughn. God help the man brave enough to try that. More laughter. She recognized at least 2 of the voices. She slowed without meaning to. You seen her arms? I've seen trail hands with less muscle. Maybe that's the trouble. Can't figure out if she's a man or... She kept walking. She was good at this. She'd had 14 years of practice. Hey! The voice came from behind her in the opposite direction from the saloon. Miss Vaughn? She turned. Tyler Quinn was coming up the street from the direction of the livery, moving at an easy pace, his hat on, dust on his boots from a day's work. He'd heard. She could see by his face that he'd heard. There was something in his jaw, a tension, but he looked at her, not at the saloon. You done for the evening? He asked. Yes, she said. He fell into step beside her. Not in front of her, not trailing her beside her. They walked the next half-block in silence. You do that a lot, he said finally. Do what? Walk past it, without stopping. Every day, she said. He was quiet for another few steps. That takes more strength than most people around here have. She stopped walking. She turned to look at him because she wanted to see his face when she said what she was about to say. Mr. Quinn, I know what you're doing, and I don't need defending. I know that, he said. He met her eyes without flinching. I'm not trying to defend you. I'm saying what I see. A pause. I've been in a lot of towns. I've seen a lot of people fold under less. You haven't folded. She studied him. You've been here 5 days, she said. Yep. You don't know anything about this town. I know enough. He said it simple, like it was nothing to argue over. She turned and kept walking. After a moment, he walked beside her again, unhurried, not pressing anything further. They reached the corner, where she turned off toward the house, attached to the back of her forge, and she stopped. Good night, Mr. Quinn, she said. Good night, Miss Vaughn. He touched his hat. "Good work on that latch, by the way." Harker was pleased. She said nothing to that. She went inside. She stood in her front room in the dark for a long moment before she lit the lamp. Her hands weren't shaking. She made sure of that before she checked. Then, she made herself supper and went to bed and lay awake for a while, listening to the town settle into silence around her, the forge cooling the street going quiet, the summer heat pressing through the walls, and she thought about a man who'd bought her a pastry and then walked beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. She did not know what to do with that. She did not know what to do with any of it. But she was still thinking about it when she finally fell asleep. The gate latch she'd made for Tyler Quinn was the cleanest piece of ironwork she'd turned out all summer, and she knew it, and she was irritated by that. She hadn't meant to put extra care into it. She'd told herself it was the same order as any other measure: it right, heat, it right, strike it right, done. But somewhere between starting and finishing, she'd added a detail to the mechanism, a small internal stop that would keep the latch from jarring open in high wind, and the stop required an extra 40 minutes of work and wasn't something she did on standard ranch hardware. She'd stood there looking at the finished piece and known exactly what she'd done and why, and neither answer was something she wanted to sit with. She left it on the edge of the bench for Thursday morning with a strip of paper that had the price written on it, and she made herself go back to the wheel rim she had waiting. He came for it at mid-morning while she was mid-heat on something else, and she didn't stop working. 70 cents, she said over the noise of the bellows. She heard him pick it up. A pause. "This has got a stop piece in it," he said. "Wind jars, standard latches. Didn't seem useful to make you one that'd give you the same problem in 3 months. Another pause. Longer. "I didn't ask for that," he said. "No," she agreed. "You didn't." He set the coins on the clean edge of the bench where he always put them. She noticed he'd put an extra dime with the 70 cents. She looked at it. "That's too much," she said. "That's for the stop piece," he said. "Fair's fair." She picked up the dime and held it out without turning around. "I price the job. I'll charge what I price." He didn't take the dime back right away. She could feel him deciding something. Then he took it. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. She went back to the fire. She heard him walk out. She stood there with the bellows in her hand and her jaw set and the forge roaring and told herself that was the right call. She didn't need his extra dime. She didn't need anything from him. Her hands were perfectly steady. She checked. It was Dorothy Hale's daughter Clara who started the most recent round. Clara was 19 and had recently become engaged to a young man whose family ran the feed store 2 towns over, which had elevated Clara's sense of social standing to a degree that did not match the actual scale of the achievement. Nora had nothing against Clara personally. She'd made the iron fence posts for the Hale yard 3 years back, and Clara had been pleasant enough then, a quiet girl who kept her opinions to herself. That was apparently no longer the policy. Nora heard about it from Bessie at the bakehouse, Bessie being one of the few people in K-Fax who talked to Nora like a person rather than a problem. Bessie was 62, wide as a barn door, and had zero patience for pretension, which made her excellent company. "Clara Hale was in here this morning," Bessie said, pushing a cup of coffee across her counter. Nora had stopped in on her way back from the lumber yard where she'd gone to check on a steel fitting order. "Sat right there where you're sitting. Had 2 of her friends with her." Nora said. She wrapped both hands around the cup. "They were talking about you." Bessie said it flat like a fact because with Bessie it was always just a fact. Clara said it's a shame what some women make of themselves. Said you weren't an example of anything respectable. A pause. "She said it loud enough I was meant to hear it. Which means she was meant to hear it too if you follow." Nora drank her coffee. "She also," Bessie continued, "said it was disgraceful that a proper man like the new Broken Creek Hand was being seen in conversation with you. Said somebody ought to let him know what kind of woman you were before he made a fool of himself." Nora set down the cup. What kind of woman am I according to Clara Hale? According to Clara Hale, you're unnatural. Bessie said it without blinking. On account of your arms and your profession and your general failure to disappear. The two of them sat with that for a moment. Did you say anything? Nora asked. I told her the apple fritters were going fast, and if she wanted one, she'd better stop flapping and buy. Bessie picked up her own cup. She didn't buy one, which is her loss. They were good this morning. Nora almost smiled. Almost. Tyler Quinn isn't my concern, she said. He's a customer. He bought you a pastry, Bessie said in the tone of someone presenting evidence. He bought a pastry. It happened to come here. Bessie looked at her over the rim of her cup. That look said 17 things without a single word, and all 17 of them made Nora's jaw go tight. You go ahead and tell yourself that, honey, Bessie said. Nora finished her coffee and went back to the forge. He came in on a Saturday afternoon with a broken trace chain. It wasn't his horse this time. It was a wagon chain from one of the Broken Creek work rigs, a heavy piece that had split at a link under load. He laid it across the bench and Nora looked at it and told him 2 hours, maybe less. He said he'd wait because Harker needed the rig by evening. She didn't argue. She built up the fire and got to work, and for the first 20 minutes he sat on the bench along the side wall and was quiet. He had a piece of leather he was working on a strap that needed restitching from the look of it, and he sat there with an awl and thread and occupied himself. She was aware of him the way she'd become aware of all the sounds in the forge over 14 years, the particular weight of a presence. You grew up here? He asked after a while. Born here, she said. My mother died when I was 3. My father raised me in the forge more or less. No siblings. One brother. He went east when he was 18. We write. She turned the chain link in the tongs. He's a printer in Philadelphia. He's done well. Did he know how to smith? Some. He didn't take to it. A pause. My father was more disappointed than he let on. But he never said so to Nathan. That was decent of him. Tyler stitched for a moment. Your father sounds like he was a fair man. He was. He was also stubborn and difficult, and he let the books go to disaster every quarter, which was a headache. But fair, yes. She didn't know why she was saying this much. She generally didn't. He treated my work the same as he'd have treated a son's. He didn't decide it was lesser because of who was doing it. That shaped you, Tyler said. Everything shapes you, she said, whether you ask it to or not. He went quiet again. She worked. The chain link was coming together clean, the weld solid. She'd do a stress test on it before she gave it back, but she could already tell it was going to hold. Then he said, What happened when you took over the forge alone? She hit the link. Sparks. What do you think happened? I think the town had opinions. The town has always had opinions. She set the piece and worked the bellows. When my father was alive, they could call me his helper. When he died, they had to reckon with what I actually was, and they didn't like the reckoning. A beat. Half of them tried to convince me to sell to a man from Austin who came through looking for business opportunity. The other half just stopped talking to me directly and started talking about me instead. It was a natural sorting. And you stayed. This is my forge, she said. Like that was the only answer there was. Because it was. He stopped stitching. She could feel him looking at her, not staring, just looking the way he did, like he was actually paying attention. You ever think about leaving? She stopped working for a second. Just a second. Every winter, she said. Not in summer. Summer I'm too busy to think. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh but was close to it. Something soft. That's honest. I don't have much patience for the other kind. No, he agreed. I've noticed that. She handed him the repaired chain an hour and 40 minutes later. He tested it hand over hand, checking the weld, checking the links on either side. He knew what he was looking for, and he found it, and what he found satisfied him. "This'll hold a loaded wagon up a grade," he said. "It better," she said. "I don't redo repairs." He paid, said his thanks, and was halfway to the door when he turned back. That had become a small pattern with him, she'd noticed. He always turned back. "The harvest dance is 3 weeks out," he said. "Last Saturday of this month." She looked at him. "I'm aware," she said slowly. "The ranch hands go every year," Harker says. "He encourages it, thinks it builds community." Tyler turned his hat in his hands, which she'd come to understand was what he did when he was choosing words carefully. "I thought I might ask if you were planning to attend." The forge was very quiet for a moment. "I don't go to the dance," she said. "How come?" She set down the tongs. She faced him fully. "Mr. Quinn, you've been in this town 3 weeks. I've been here my whole life. You don't need me to explain to you why I don't go to the dance." He held her eyes. "No," he said. "I reckon I don't. But I'm asking anyway." "Then the answer is no." She picked the tongs back up. "Was there something else you needed?" He stood there one more moment, not hurt, not offended, just thinking. Then he put his hat on. "Have a good evening, Miss Vaughn," he said, and walked out. She stared at the doorway after he'd gone. She brought the hammer down on a piece of iron that didn't need hammering and left a mark on it that she'd have to work out later. 3 days after that conversation, Clara Hale came to the forge. Not for work. Nora could tell immediately from the way Clara walked in, hands folded in front of her chin, up the careful posture of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to do. She had one of her friends with her. Of course she did. Clara Hale did not do anything without a witness. "Miss Vaughn," Clara said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," Nora said. "But go ahead." Clara blinked. The friend, a girl named Susanna, who had the look of someone who'd been told this would be fine, and was now privately reconsidering, shifted her weight. "I wanted to speak to you," Clara said. Woman to woman. "All right." "It's about Tyler Quinn." Clara set her shoulders. "I think you ought to know there are people in this town who are concerned. He's a decent man, and people feel it's their responsibility to make sure he understands the social landscape here, before misunderstandings develop." Nora set down her hammer. She gave Clara her full attention. "What misunderstandings would those be?" "Well," Clara glanced at Susanna, who was studying the floor. "He's been seen coming here, regularly. He's a customer. He bought you breakfast. He bought a pastry from Bessie's bakehouse. It ended up here. That's between him and Bessie." Clara's chin went up a little higher. "Miss Vaughn, I'm only trying to be helpful. Tyler Quinn is new here. He doesn't know how people see you. He doesn't understand that a man who's regularly seen with you is going to have people talking. For his own sake." "For his own sake," Nora repeated very quietly. "Yes." "Clara." Nora picked up her hammer. "Tyler Quinn is a grown man who has worked a cattle ranch ridden from Colorado to Texas, and has not yet in my experience required a 19-year-old girl to manage his reputation. I think he can reckon with the social landscape on his own." She went back to the fire. "Good day." Clara's face had gone red. "I'm only saying what everyone is thinking." "You are, and everyone should keep thinking it quietly." She didn't look up. "I've got work to do." Susanna had her hand on Clara's arm before Clara could say another word, and the two of them walked out. Nora heard their voices on the boardwalk, sharp, indignant, dropping to whispers. She worked the bellows. Her heartbeat was fine. Steady. She was fine. What she was not expecting was the sound of a single pair of boots coming back up the threshold 20 seconds later. She looked up fast, expecting Clara, and she was already braced for it. It was Tyler Quinn. He was standing in the doorway, hat in his hands, and by his face she knew he'd heard at least part of it. He'd been coming up the street. He must have been. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "How long were you standing out there?" she asked. "Long enough," he said. Her jaw tightened. "You didn't need to hear that." "No," he said. "I didn't." He walked in, slow and deliberate, and stopped 2 paces from the bench. "I want to say something, and I'd ask you to let me finish before you tell me you don't need anything from me." She looked at him. "Go ahead." He took a breath. "What Clara Hale said in here, that a man seen with you is going to have people talking for his own sake. I want you to know that is the least persuasive argument I have ever heard in my life." He said it flat and plain. No drama in it, which somehow made it worse to hear than if he'd shouted it. "My reputation in this town is my own business, and I'll manage it as I see fit. Which right now means I am going to keep coming to this forge because you do the best ironwork in 30 miles, and I am going to keep talking to you when I come because I find you worth talking to. And if that causes comment, I genuinely do not care." Nora stared at him. She was good at keeping her face still. She'd had a long time to practice. "You're going to make your life harder here," she said. "My life's been hard before," he said. "I survived it." "Tyler." She stopped. It was the first time she'd used his given name. She watched him notice it, a small thing, a shift in his eyes. "This town doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive easily. If you plant yourself on my side of something, they'll hold it against you. Then they'll hold it against me." She looked at him for a long time. "You are a very stubborn man," she said. "I've been told that." His mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the beginning of one. "I've also been told I have good instincts, and my instincts say you've been standing alone in this forge for too long." That landed somewhere she wasn't ready for it to land. She looked away. "I'm not asking for anything from you, Nora," he said. Quiet now, almost careful. "I'm not asking you to feel a certain way or do a certain thing. I'm just telling you straight that I'm not going to pretend you're invisible because it makes other people comfortable." The forge was completely still. Then Nora reached into her apron pocket and held out the dime he'd put on the bench last Thursday, the extra one she'd refused. She'd kept it there. She hadn't examined why. "Put this toward the next order," she said. "Consider it a credit." He looked at the dime. Then he looked at her. He took it. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And this time there was a smile in it, small and real and not trying to be anything else. He left. She stood with her hammer in her hand, and the fire roaring and the summer heat pressing down through every crack in the walls, and she thought, this is going to complicate everything. She thought it already has. She thought about the harvest dance and the way he'd asked her if she was planning to attend, straight and simple, like it was a reasonable question, like she was a reasonable woman who might reasonably say yes. She thought about what it would mean to say yes. She went back to work because that was what she did. But the rhythm was different now, and she knew it. Something had shifted, quiet and certain as the season turning, and she didn't know yet whether it would save her or cost her something she couldn't afford to lose. She said yes on a Tuesday. She hadn't planned to. She'd spent the better part of a week planning not to, building a solid wall of reasons that she could recite in her sleep, the town's opinion, the staring, the talk that would follow, the particular kind of cruelty that groups of people found when they had a setting and an audience and something to disapprove of. She'd listed every reason out in her head the same way she listed a materials order. Logical, thorough, final. Then Tyler Quinn came in with a question about the fence brackets for the Broken Creek's east pasture, and when she handed him the measurements she'd worked up, he took the paper and looked at it and said, very casual-like, it was nothing at all. "You make up your mind about the dance." And she said, "Yes, I'll go." He looked up from the paper. She looked right back at him. "Don't make a thing of it," she said. "I'm going because I feel like going. That's all." "Yes, ma'am," he said. But his eyes said something else entirely, and she pretended not to see it. She pretended so hard, her back teeth ached. The next 10 days were the longest of her summer. The town knew she was going before she'd told a single person. That was K-Fax for you. News traveled faster than wind and arrived warmer. Bessie told her on Wednesday that Dorothy Hale had already convened what Bessie described as an informal committee of the concerned, which meant Dorothy and 2 other women sitting in the back pew of the church discussing the moral implications of Nora Vaughn attending a community event like a normal citizen. What exactly are they concerned about? Nora asked. Broadly, Bessie set down her coffee. Specifically, they seem to feel that a woman with your particular presentation attending a social dance, accompanied by an eligible man, is some kind of threat to the established order. The established order, Nora repeated. Their words, though Dorothy said natural decency, which amounts to the same thing. Bessie waved a hand. I told Pete Cassidy when he came in for his morning roll that I thought it was the best thing to happen to this town in 3 years. Pete agreed for whatever that's worth. It was worth something. Pete Cassidy was 81 years old and had helped her father build the forge's second chimney when Nora was 7. His opinion carried weight in ways that Dorothy Hale's careful committee could not match. Still, she went home that night and stood in her kitchen and looked at the 2 dresses she owned. One was a work dress, brown heavy cotton built for function. The other was dark blue wool that she'd ordered from a catalog 2 years back for Nathan's wedding, which she'd attended in Philadelphia in November. She'd worn it once. She didn't know what she was going to do about this. She put both dresses back and went to bed. On Thursday, a man named Gerald Pratt came to the forge. Gerald Pratt ran a small dry goods operation out of the building next to the post office, and he was on the town council, and he had the specific quality of a man who believed strongly in his own reasonableness while being profoundly unreasonable. Nora had dealt with him before he'd come to her twice about commercial ironwork for his storefront, and both times had tried to argue her price down by questioning whether her work was up to standard. Both times she'd held her rate and pointed to the 10 years of ironwork holding the town together as evidence. Both times he'd paid without further argument because he had no other option. He came in without any stated order. He stood with his hands behind his back and his hat, on which Nora noticed immediately. Tyler always took his hat off. She was aware she had become a person who noticed that. Miss Vaughn, Pratt said, I'll get straight to it. Please, she said. There's some feeling among the council, he said. Council like it was a word that conferred actual authority, that the harvest dance being what it is, a community gathering, a family event, certain attendees should consider whether their presence serves the overall spirit of the occasion. She stopped what she was doing. She turned to face him fully. Say that plain. Pratt's jaw worked. It would be better for everyone if you sat this one out. The dance is for it's a particular kind of social event. It's not the kind of occasion that accommodates every... Gerald. Her voice was very quiet. This is a public dance on public ground funded in part by every tradesperson in this town, including the $50 I contributed last year at Reverend Ames's direct request. If you're standing in my forge telling me I'm not welcome at an event I helped fund, I need you to say that in plain language so we both understand what's being said. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. I'm only suggesting... He started. I heard what you're suggesting. She picked up her hammer. Tell the council I'll be there Saturday. And tell them if they have further thoughts on the subject, they can bring their ironwork to the fellow in Midland and see how that goes for them. She turned back to the fire. Good day, Mr. Pratt. She heard him leave. She stood there with her hammer raised over an anvil she hadn't struck yet, and she breathed. Her hands were shaking. She brought the hammer down, and then again, until the shaking stopped. She told Tyler what Pratt had said when he came by Friday afternoon. She hadn't planned to tell him either, but he could read her face well enough by now that he knew something was wrong before she opened her mouth, and when he asked, the whole thing came out flat and factual. Pratt, the council, the $50, all of it. Tyler was quiet through all of it. When she finished, he said, "You're still going." "Obviously," she said. He was quiet for another moment. "Good," he said. And there was something in it, not anger exactly, but the hard edge of a man who has decided something. "I'll come by Saturday at 7. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." He looked at her. "Nora, I'm going to the dance. You're going to the dance. We're going to walk in together, and if Gerald Pratt or Dorothy Hale, or any member of any informal committee of the concerned, wants to have an opinion about that, they can have it. I've dealt with smaller men than Pratt doing bigger things than this." She looked at him. There was a version of herself, the version that had gotten very good at not needing things, that wanted to say, "I don't need an escort, I can walk in alone." And she could. She absolutely could. She'd done harder things alone than walk into a harvest dance. But she looked at Tyler Quinn, who had ridden in from Colorado, and paid her fairly, and bought her a pastry she hadn't asked for, and walked beside her past the two-bit on a Friday night like it was the most natural thing in the world, and something in her chest made a sound like a door coming off a rusted hinge. 7 o'clock, she said. He put his hat on. "Yes, ma'am." Saturday came the way inevitable things do, faster than you're ready for, and slow as the last 10 minutes all at once. She wore the dark blue dress. She'd pressed it Thursday evening and hung it, and she'd stood looking at it Friday night and thought about her father, who would have said, "You look fine. Nora, quit fussing. You've never fussed a day in your life." He would have been right on both counts. Her arms were what they were. The sleeves of the blue dress were short. It was July. It was Texas. Long sleeves weren't a practical option, and so her arms were visible, and she was aware of them, and she made herself stop being aware of them by the time she heard Tyler's boots on her front step. She opened the door before he knocked. He had cleaned up considerably fresh shirt coat boots that had actually been polished. He'd run a razor over his jaw, though he'd left enough shadow that he still looked like himself. He was holding his hat in both hands. He looked at her, and for a moment he didn't say anything. "You look beautiful," he said. No preamble, no qualification. Just that, straight and simple. Her throat did something complicated. "Don't start," she said. "I'm not starting anything. I'm stating a fact." He put his hat on and offered his arm. "Miss Vaughn, shall we?" She took his arm. They heard the music from 2 streets over, a fiddle and a guitar, someone calling the rhythm in a voice that carried. The community hall had all its windows thrown open against the July heat, and light poured out of every one of them, and there were people on the steps and around the entrance, and every single one of them went quiet one by one as Nora Vaughn walked up the path with Tyler Quinn's arm under her hand. She felt it. She felt every pair of eyes, felt the silence ripple outward, felt the weight of it, the same way she felt the heat of the forge, total and surrounding, and not going anywhere. She kept walking. Tyler didn't slow down, didn't look to the left or right. He walked at her pace, steady as a good horse on familiar ground, and when they reached the bottom of the steps, he put his free hand briefly over hers on his arm, just for a second, just enough pressure to say, "I'm here," and then they went up. Inside was worse. The music had stopped, not all at once, but in pieces, the fiddle trailing off the collar, going silent, conversation dying in clusters. She could see Dorothy Hale standing near the punch table, with her hand frozen in the act of reaching for something. She could see Gerald Pratt near the wall, jaw tight. She could see Clara with her fiancé, who looked more curious than hostile at least. She could also see Pete Cassidy, who was sitting near the far wall with his wife Margaret, and Pete Cassidy stood up when he saw Nora. He stood up, and he nodded at her, a slow, deliberate nod, like a man making a statement. Margaret stood up with him. Then Bessie was there near the food table, with an apron she hadn't bothered to take off, and Bessie raised her punch cup in Nora's direction like a toast. The music started again. Tentative at first, then fuller, the fiddle finding its footing. Nora breathed. "Pete Cassidy just stood up for you," Tyler said low near her ear. "I know," she said. "Good man." "The best," she said. And she meant it. For the first hour, they stayed to the edges. Tyler got punch which was watered down and too sweet, and they stood with Pete and Margaret and Bessie and talked real conversation about the summer heat and the cattle market and a sickness going through the region's sheep herds that Pete had news about from a cousin down south. Normal talk. Ordinary, good normal talk, and with every minute of it, Nora felt the room adjust the way a room does when the initial shock of something wears off, and people remember they have their own evenings to attend to. Not everyone adjusted warmly. Dorothy Hale had positioned herself across the room and had not looked away from Nora for the better part of 40 minutes, which was committed even by Dorothy's standards. Gerald Pratt had left. Clara had whispered something to her fiancé that made him glance over twice. But Pete was talking about the sheep sickness, and Bessie was loudly judging the quality of the evening's baked goods, and the fiddle was playing something with a good quick rhythm, and the hall was hot and bright and alive, and Nora was standing in the middle of it. She was standing in the middle of it, and she had not turned to stone. Then Tyler set down his cup and held out his hand. She looked at his hand. "I don't know how to dance," she said. Flat, true. "Neither do I," he said. "Not well. But the fiddle's playing, and I'd like to try if you're willing." She looked up at his face. He was serious. Not performing, just asking. She took his hand. He led her out toward the center of the floor, where 3 other couples were moving in loose approximation of a reel. She was aware of the room contracting, of attention pulling toward them, of the particular held breath quality of a crowd watching something they don't know how to categorize. Tyler put his right hand at her waist and held her other hand up, and he looked at her, and he said very quietly, "I meant what I said at the door." Tyler. "You look beautiful, Nora. Your arms and all of it is beautiful." He said it like a man correcting a ledger entry that's been wrong for too long. Like it was simply accurate and the record needed to show it. "I want you to know that before we make complete fools of ourselves trying to dance." She stared at him. The fiddle changed to something slower. Lucky timing or providence, she didn't know which. "You really have no sense of self-preservation," she said. "Not much," he agreed. "Ready." They danced. It was imperfect and slightly awkward, and she stepped on his boot twice, and he moved the wrong direction once, and they nearly collided with another couple, but they held on and kept going. And somewhere in the second minute of it, Nora Vaughn laughed. A real one. Sudden and startled out of her, because Tyler's expression when she stepped on his boot was so genuinely unprepared that it was just funny. A plain human funny thing. He looked at her when she laughed, and what was on his face was something she didn't have a word for. Not love. It was too soon for love. She didn't deal in words she hadn't earned yet, but it was close to wonder, like he was watching something remarkable happen. "There she is," he said quietly. She stopped laughing. "Don't. I'm not doing anything." "You're doing something," she said. "I don't know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything with it right now," he said. "Just dance." She danced. Jid. It was Dorothy Hale who broke it. Nora had been half expecting it all evening, and when it came, she was almost relieved by the timing they'd had, an hour and a half, which was more than she'd planned for. Dorothy came across the floor during a pause between songs, moving with the specific, purposeful grace of a woman who has decided she is representing something larger than herself. She stopped 3 feet from Nora. She did not look at Tyler. "Miss Vaughn," she said, "I think it's admirable that you came tonight, truly. But I need to say, woman to woman, that there are children present this evening, and certain things are not appropriate for Dorothy." Tyler's voice. Not loud, not aggressive, quiet and absolute. "I'm going to stop you there." Dorothy looked at him. She had not been expecting to be interrupted by him. She'd been counting on him being a bystander. "This woman," Tyler said, "has worked this town's iron for 14 years. She fixed the hinges on your church, the fence posts on your yard, the wheel rim on your husband's wagon last spring." "Yes, I asked around. I know whose wagon that was." She has held more of this town together than most of the people in this room, and she is here tonight on the same right as every other person who contributes to this community." He looked at Dorothy without heat, just clarity. "The children in this room could learn a great deal from her. That's my view." Dorothy's face had gone through 3 different shades of something. "I didn't ask for your view," she said. "No," Tyler said. "But you came over here, so you've got it." The people near them had gone very still. Nora could see Pete Cassidy out of the corner of her eye, and Pete had his arms crossed and a look on his face that was nearly satisfied. Bessie was not even pretending not to watch. Dorothy Hale looked at Nora one more time, a long look, the kind that was meant to communicate something final, and then she turned and walked back the way she'd come. The silence held for 2 seconds. Then the fiddle started up again, and the room breathed, and someone across the hall said something that made a small group laugh, and the evening went on. Nora was looking straight ahead. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," Tyler said. "It's going to cost you." "Nora." He turned to face her, and his voice dropped so only she could hear it. "I grew up in a town that decided what a man was worth before he opened his mouth. I spent 10 years fighting that. I'm not going to stand 3 feet away from you and watch someone make you small. I'm not built that way." She looked at him. For a moment she couldn't speak. "Your father raised you right," she said finally. Something moved across his face, something that looked like grief, and something that looked like gratitude all at once. "He tried," Tyler said. "He didn't have much time to try, but he tried." She didn't ask, but she noted it. A wound there old and shaped the kind of thing a person carries long enough they forget it's not just part of them. "Dance with me again," she said. He looked up. "I can't have you standing there looking like that," she said. "Come on." He took her hand. This time they did better. This time she knew the shape of the space between them, and she stopped thinking about the room, and the staring, and Dorothy Hale's face, and she just felt the music, and his hand at her waist, and the plain and extraordinary fact that she was here in the middle of the floor, and the world had not ended, and nobody had succeeded in making her leave. She had not folded. She was still standing. When the song ended, Tyler kept her hand a moment longer than the dance required. She let him. The walk home from the dance was quiet, in the way that full things are quiet. Not empty, not uncomfortable. The kind of quiet that settles between 2 people when enough has happened that words would only get in the way of it. Tyler walked beside her, same as he always did, at her pace, not ahead, and the July night pressed warm around them, and the music from the hall faded block by block until the only sounds were their boots on the packed earth, and somewhere off past the south edge of town, a dog that had opinions about the hour. They stopped at her front step. She turned to face him. He was holding his hat again, turning it in both hands, and she'd come to understand that was just who he was, a man who needed something to do with his hands when he was thinking. "I had a good evening," she said. She meant it, which surprised her less than it would have a month ago. "So did I." He looked at her. "You all right?" "I'm fine." "I know you're fine. I'm asking if you're all right." She considered the difference. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Ask me tomorrow." The corner of his mouth moved. "Can I?" She looked at him. "Ask you tomorrow," he said. "Can I come by and ask?" "You come by most days anyway," she said. "I don't see why tomorrow would be different." "It's Sunday." "The forge is closed Sundays." "I know." He was watching her carefully. "I'm not asking to come by the forge." The night was very still. "There's a decent oak out back of my property," she said after a moment. "I take my coffee there Sunday mornings. The shade is good." A pause. 7:30. He put his hat on. "Yes, ma'am." She went inside. She leaned her back against the closed door in the dark, and stood there for a full minute, and she was smiling, and she knew she was smiling, and she decided she was allowed. Sunday morning came in soft and early, the way summer mornings do before the heat remembers to be brutal. She had the coffee ready before 7:30 and was sitting under the oak with a cup in both hands when she heard the gate. He'd brought biscuits from Bessie's. Of course he had. "Did you plan that ahead of time?" she asked as he settled onto the ground a few feet from her chair, setting his hat in the grass beside him. "Last night after I left, I went by and knocked." He broke a biscuit in half without ceremony. Bessie was still up. Bessie is always still up. "She said to tell you she's proud of you." Nora looked down at her coffee. "Bessie's sentimental." "Maybe." Tyler handed her half a biscuit. "Or maybe she's just paying attention." They ate in a comfortable quiet. Somewhere in the tree above them, a bird was conducting urgent business that apparently required a great deal of noise. The biscuits were good. Bessie put something in them, some spice or technique she'd never shared that made them different from every other biscuit in the county. "You said you grew up in a town that judged a man before he opened his mouth," Nora said eventually. He looked over. "I did." "What town?" "Small place in eastern Colorado. You wouldn't know it." He set his hands around his own cup. "My father was a Mexican man who married a red-haired woman from Tennessee and settled where he could find work. That was not considered an acceptable combination by a significant portion of the population." She was quiet, listening. "He worked twice as hard as any man on that street and built a good life anyway," Tyler said. "He used to say that other people's opinions were whether you couldn't stop the rain, but you could decide whether to stand in it." A pause. "He died when I was 16. After that, I stood in a lot of rain." "I'm sorry," she said. She meant it plain without dressing. "He'd have liked you," Tyler said. "He respected people who worked hard and didn't apologize for it." She didn't say anything to that for a moment. Then she said, "My father would have liked you too. He had very little patience for men who couldn't handle a woman with more skill than them. He said it was a character weakness." She looked at the tree above them. He had strong opinions about character weaknesses. Tyler laughed. A real one, warm and sudden. She'd made him laugh before small amounts quiet ones. This was fuller, and it did something to the center of her chest that she didn't examine too closely. "My kind of man," Tyler said. "He was," she said. "He was my kind of man, too." On Monday morning, Nora opened the forge and found a note wedged in the doorframe. It was not signed. It didn't need to be. She recognized the handwriting from the invoice receipts she'd kept over 3 years of Gerald Pratt's commercial orders. It read, "A woman who forgets her place invites the consequences. Consider yourself warned." She read it twice. Then she folded it, put it in her apron pocket, and fired up the forge. By mid-morning, she'd decided on 2 things. The first was that she was going to go see Reverend Ames because whatever Pratt's warning meant in practical terms, a man on the town council didn't write unsigned notes to women without some kind of action being attached to it. The second was that she was going to go alone because this was her business, and she wasn't going to import Tyler Quinn into every hard thing that crossed her path. She told him this when he came by at noon. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she'd come to rely on about him. When she finished, he said, "What kind of action do you think he's talking about?" "I don't know. The council has some authority over commercial licenses in town. He could be trying to make noise about my operating permit." She'd thought about this all morning. Or it could be nothing. A frightened man rattling his cage. "He didn't look frightened Saturday night," Tyler said. "He looked angry." "Angry men do stupid things," she said. "I'd rather know which kind of stupid this is before I decide how to handle it." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "I have a suggestion," he said, "and I'd like you to hear it before you say no." "Go ahead." "Jim Harker has a cousin who practices law in Abilene. He's passed through here twice since I came on at the ranch. Jim mentions him sometimes, says he's a sharp man, the kind who knows how council authority works and where it ends." He looked at her steadily. It might be worth a letter. She started to say she didn't need a lawyer, then she stopped. She thought about Pratt's note in her apron pocket. She thought about the word consequences written in his particular tight hand. She thought about the $50 she'd contributed to the Harvest Dance Fund, and the 14 years of ironwork, and the fact that a man who'd already told her she wasn't welcome at a public event was capable of deciding his disapproval had legal applications. "A letter," she said. "Just information," Tyler said. "Know what you're dealing with before it deals with you." She pulled the note out of her pocket and held it out. He took it, read it. His jaw tightened, not dramatically, just the way a man's jaw tightens when he sees something that confirms something he'd hoped wasn't true. "I'll write to Jim's cousin today," he said. "I'll write it myself," she said. "This is my situation. I'll handle the correspondence." He handed the note back. "Yes, ma'am." Reverend Ames was a small man with big ears and the specific quality of someone who had listened to so many people's problems that he'd lost his capacity for shock. He received Nora in his study with the same mild attention he'd have given a deacon reporting on the collection plate, and he read Pratt's note without expression. He handed it back. "Gerald Pratt," he said in the tone of a man confirming an unpleasant diagnosis. "You're not surprised," Nora said. "Gerald has been unhappy about the direction of certain things for some time." Ames laced his fingers together on his desk. "He raised the question of your operating permit at last month's council meeting. I was present. The majority did not support his position." She felt something cold move through her. "He's already raised it." "He raised the question. It went nowhere. But Gerald is a man who returns to things." Ames looked at her carefully. "Miss Vaughn, I want to be straightforward with you. You have more support on that council than you may realize. Cassidy's word counts, and Pete has already made his position clear. But if Gerald decides to make a formal motion, then I need to be ready for it," she said. "Yes." He paused. "Are you?" "I'm going to be," she said. She went back to the forge and wrote the letter to Jim Harker's lawyer cousin in Abilene. She wrote it carefully and factually, the note, the history, the permit question Ames had mentioned, and she did not let her hand shake while she wrote it. When it was done, she read it twice, made 2 small corrections, and sealed it. She handed it to Tyler when he came by that afternoon to give her Harker's cousin's address. He didn't read it. He just took it. "I'll write it to the post office now," he said. "It'll keep until tomorrow," she said. "I know," he said. And he went anyway. The answer came back in 6 days, which was faster than she'd expected, and suggested Jim Harker's cousin was either very efficient or very interested. His name was Robert Callan. His letter was 3 pages written in the clear, organized language of a man who thought in structures. He laid out the scope of the town council's authority over commercial operating licenses, which was narrower than Pratt likely believed. He noted that an unsigned threat delivered to a licensed tradesperson could itself constitute harassment with actionable standing. He asked for the date her original license had been issued, and whether there had been any formal complaints on record. He also noted at the bottom of the 3rd page that if Pratt made a formal motion, it would need to go before the full council, at which point any member of the public had the right to address the council before the vote. Nora read that last part 3 times. She went to find Pete Cassidy. Pete was on his porch when she arrived, doing nothing in particular in the way of a man who has earned the right to do nothing on a weekday afternoon. He looked at her when she came up the path and he said without preamble, "Gerald made a motion." She stopped. "Went in emergency session this morning." Pete's voice was dry as the summer ground. "He's pushing for a license review. Says there are safety concerns about the forge's operation." "Safety concerns," she said. "He couldn't well say the real concerns," Pete said. "So he dressed them up." He looked at her over his folded hands. "You've got 4 days before the review session. You need to be there and you need to bring your records." "I have 14 years of records," she said. Bring all of them. She went back to the forge and pulled out the ledger box from under the bench, the box her father had started, and she'd continued every order, every payment, every permit renewal dated and documented, in the cramped, practical handwriting that both Vaughns shared. She sat down on the workbench floor and went through every page. Her records were immaculate. Of course they were. She'd inherited the chaos of her father's bookkeeping and spent the first 2 years after his death reconstructing and organizing everything. She knew exactly what she had and where it was. But it was 4 days, and Callan was in Abilene, and she was here, and Pratt had the home ground advantage of a man who'd been maneuvering on this council for years. She was sitting on the forge floor, surrounded by ledger books, when she heard Tyler's boots. He looked at the floor. At her. At the ledgers. "What happened?" he said. She told him. He came and sat on the floor beside her, right there on the coal-dusted boards without comment, and picked up the nearest ledger. "What are we looking for?" he said. She looked at him sitting on her floor in his good shirt, flipping through pages of her handwriting. "Any gaps in the permit renewals," she said. "Any year where the renewal date is more than 30 days out from the deadline." "Right." He started reading. They went through 4 years before she found the only irregularity, 1879, when her permit renewal had come in 34 days late because the town clerk had been ill and the process had backed up. She had documentation of the delay. It was in the clerk's own hand. "That's his opening," Tyler said. He held the page carefully. "That's what he'll use." "I know." She looked at the clerk's note. "But I have the clerk's letter." "Will Pratt have access to who was on the council in 79 to confirm the delay was administrative?" "Ames was on it then," she said. "He'll remember." "Then we need Ames at that session." Tyler looked at her. "And Callan, can he be here in 4 days?" "I don't know. I can write today." "Write today." He set the ledger down. "I'll ride to Abilene myself if I need to." She stared at him. "That's 2 days each way." "Then I'd better leave tonight," he said. "Tyler." "Nora." He met her eyes, and his were completely steady. "Pratt picked a fight with the wrong forge. I'd like us to win it." A pause. "Will you let me help you?" She sat with that for a moment. Letting people help her was not something she had practice in. She'd been the person other people needed, the person with the hammer, with the skill, with the records, and the steadiness. Being on the receiving end of that particular arrangement felt foreign and slightly dangerous, like standing on ground she hadn't tested. But she looked at Tyler Quinn, who had ridden in from Colorado and chosen to put himself on her side of things before he had any reason to. And she thought about her father saying that strength wasn't just the hammer, it was knowing when to set it down. "Go right to Callan first," she said. "If he can be here, that's better than a 2-day ride. And if he can't, then we'll talk about Abilene." He got up off the floor, brushed coal dust off his shirt without appearing to notice it, and held out his hand. She took it, and he pulled her up easy, like it was nothing, and for a second they were standing close enough that she could see the particular green-brown of his eyes and the 3-day stubble coming back along his jaw. "You're going to win this," he said. "We don't know that yet," she said. "No, but I know you." He held her hand a beat longer than necessary. "And you don't lose things you've decided to keep." She pulled her hand back. "Not roughly, just carefully, the way you handle something you're not sure yet how to hold." "Go write the letter," she said. He went. Callan wrote back in 2 days. He would come. He had business in the region anyway, he said, and this sounded like the kind of case he preferred, one where the facts were clear and the opposition was operating on bluster. He arrived Thursday evening on the eastbound stage, a lean man in his 40s with reading glasses and a leather satchel that appeared to weigh more than he did. He shook Nora's hand like a man who had shaken women's hands before and found nothing remarkable about it. They spent 2 hours at her kitchen table going through the records. Callan asked precise questions and wrote down precise answers, and twice made a small sound that she came to understand was satisfaction at finding what he was looking for. Tyler sat at the far end of the table and said almost nothing, which was exactly right. At the end of 2 hours, Callan folded his glasses and said, "Miss Vaughn, Gerald Pratt's motion is based on a single administrative anomaly that his own counsel's records document as a clerk error. He has no safety violations on record, no formal complaints, and no legal authority to revoke a license without a majority vote, which he does not have, based on what I understand of the current council composition." "He has 3 votes, Nora said. "He needs 5. "He has 3 votes, Callan agreed. "He is hoping that the process itself intimidates you into withdrawal. That is the strategy. He does not have the substance." She looked at the table. Then she looked at Callan. "What do I need to do tomorrow?" "Show up," Callan said. "Bring your records. Let me speak first, then you speak. Keep it factual and calm." He paused. "You strike me as a woman who keeps things factual and calm." "When it counts," she said. "Good." He put his glasses back in his pocket. "Then we'll be fine." After Callan left, Tyler stayed. He helped her stack the ledgers back in order, and they did it in the comfortable quiet that had become their particular language, a thing built without planning out of proximity and time, and the specific ease of 2 people who had stopped pretending they weren't glad of each other. "You scared?" he asked when the last ledger was back in its box. She thought about it honestly. "Some," she said. "Not about losing. About having to stand there and fight for something I've never had to justify before." "You've been justifying it your whole life," he said. "Just never in a formal room." She looked at him. "That's true. Tomorrow you say it out loud where it goes on the record." He settled his weight back against the bench. "That's not nothing, Nora. That's 14 years of work getting its name spoken in public." She was quiet for a moment. "You have a way of making things sound reasonable," she said. "Things generally are reasonable," he said. "People just make them complicated." She almost smiled. "Good night, Tyler." He picked up his hat. At the threshold he stopped that habit of his, the turning back, and he looked at her one more time. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "you are not going anywhere. You hear me? This is your forge, and this is your town, and Gerald Pratt does not get to decide otherwise." She held his eyes. "Good night," she said again, softer this time. He nodded once and walked out. She stood in the quiet of her kitchen with her hand on the ledger box, and the weight of tomorrow sitting on her chest, not heavy enough to knock her down, but heavy enough to know it was real. She'd faced the forge alone for 14 years. Tomorrow, she would not be alone. She wasn't sure yet what that meant, or what she was going to do about Tyler Quinn, and the particular way he stood beside her, like he'd been doing it all his life. But tonight, she let it be simple. She was not alone, and the morning was coming, and she was still standing. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The council session was held at 9 in the morning in the back room of the post office, which was the largest room the town had that wasn't a saloon or a church. It fit maybe 30 people if they stood close. By 8:50, it had 40. Nora knew because she counted. She stood outside with her ledger box under one arm, and Callan beside her with his leather satchel, and Tyler a half step behind her left shoulder, and she counted the people filing past. Some she'd expected, some she hadn't. Pete Cassidy was there, Margaret on his arm. Bessie had closed the bakehouse for the morning, which in K-Fax terms was roughly equivalent to a state proclamation. The Harker brothers had come in from the ranch. Both of them Jim and his younger brother Dale, which meant Tyler had said something she hadn't asked him to say, and she was going to address that later. She was also going to be grateful for it later. She hadn't decided the order yet. Gerald Pratt was already inside. She could see him through the window standing near the council table with 2 other men she recognized as his reliable votes, Henderson from the feed operation, and a rancher named Buell, who owed Pratt a financial favor dating back 3 years that everyone in town knew about and no one discussed. 3 votes. He needed 5. "You ready?" Callan asked. "Yes," she said. She walked in first. The room went through its particular ritual of silence, that same held breath quality she'd felt at the dance, the same ripple of attention. She didn't slow down. She went straight to the front and set her ledger box on the table designated for the public and stood beside it with her hands at her sides. Pratt looked at her. Then he looked at Callan. Something moved across his face he hadn't known about Callan. She watched him recalculate, and she watched the recalculation unsettle him, and she kept her own face entirely still. Reverend Ames, who was serving as chair, called the session to order. Pratt presented his motion. He was organized about it. She'd give him that he'd done his preparation. He cited the 1879 permit anomaly, which he presented as a pattern of non-compliance. He cited unspecified safety concerns about forge operations near residential properties, which was a new angle she hadn't anticipated, and which landed with a small, cold weight in her chest. He cited community standards. He used the phrase community standards 4 separate times each time, with the specific emphasis of a man who believes those 2 words are self-evidently on his side. When he finished, Ames looked at Callan. "The respondent's representative." Callan stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform anything. He simply laid out the facts in the order they occurred, the way a man lays out tools before starting a job, each one placed precisely where it would be needed. The 1879 anomaly was a documented administrative delay caused by the town clerk's illness, he said, and produced the clerk's own letter. He noted that permit irregularities caused by administrative failure were explicitly excluded from compliance violations under territorial law. He noted that the forge had received no formal safety complaints in 14 years of operation. He noted that the operating license had been renewed 6 times without objection, 3 of those renewals approved by Pratt himself during his council tenure. That last point landed audibly. Not loudly, Callan didn't do loud, but the room heard it. Pratt's face did something careful and controlled. Then Callan said, "The motion as presented does not meet the threshold for license review under Territorial Commercial Code. What it does meet the threshold for is harassment of a licensed tradesperson, which carries its own legal implications. I would recommend the council consider that carefully before proceeding to a vote." The room was very quiet. Ames looked at Pratt. "Gerald, the chair, would like to note that the respondent's legal representative has raised a substantive procedural objection. Do you wish to respond?" Pratt stood. "I believe the community has a right to determine what operations." "That's not a response to the procedural objection," Callan said pleasantly. Pratt's jaw tightened. "The safety concerns are legitimate." "Name a complaint," Callan said. "One formal complaint on record regarding safety." "Name it." Silence. "Gerald," Ames said quietly. Pratt sat down. Oh, that was when Pete Cassidy stood up. He didn't wait to be called on. He was 81 years old and had been in KFAX longer than half the people in the room had been alive, and he stood up with the unhurried certainty of a man who knows exactly what his word weighs. "I'd like to say something," Pete said. Ames nodded. "The chair recognizes Pete Cassidy." Pete looked around the room slowly. "I helped build that forge," he said. "Helped Thomas Vaughn put up the second chimney in the spring of 1871. I was 49 years old, and Thomas was 42, and his daughter Nora was 7, and she carried mortar buckets all day and never complained once." He paused. "That forge has been operating safe and sound for 12 years before Thomas died, and 12 years since, and in that time it has shod every horse on my property, fixed every piece of iron on the Harker Ranch, repaired the church hinges, the council building door, and the wheel on Gerald Pratt's personal wagon." "Wow." He looked at Pratt directly. "Which I know because I was standing right there when she fixed it." Somebody in the back of the room made a sound, not quite a laugh, something close. "I don't know what community standards Gerald's referring to," Pete said. The community standards I know say you don't bite the hand that keeps your town running. That's all I've got to say." He sat down. Margaret patted his arm once briskly, the way a woman pats the arm of a man who has done exactly right. Bessie from the back of the room said, "Mm-hmm," at a volume that was technically just inside acceptable. Ames called for the vote. 5 votes against. 3 for. Henderson, to Nora's complete surprise, voted against the motion. She didn't know what had changed his mind, and she didn't know if she'd ever find out. But she noted it because in her experience, people's choices in hard moments were worth remembering. Pratt's motion failed. The room exhaled. Nora stood very still for a moment after the vote was announced. She had been so focused on preparation on the records and Callan and the procedural facts that she hadn't allowed herself to feel what winning would feel like. She'd been treating it like a job measure. It right, heat it right, strike it right. She hadn't left room for the moment after. The moment after was considerable. Tyler was beside her before she'd fully processed that the session had adjourned. He didn't say anything. He just stood there close enough that she could feel the solid fact of him, and that was enough. That was exactly enough. Callan shook her hand. "Clean records win clean cases," he said. "You made my job easy." "Send your bill to the forge," she said. "I'll have it settled within the week." "No rush." He snapped his satchel closed. "Though if Pratt causes further trouble, I'd like to know about it." "He won't," Pete said, appearing at her elbow with the quiet authority of a man who has been making predictions about people for 8 decades. "Gerald's a man who operates on the belief that he'll win. He won't recover from this quickly. You've got some peace ahead, Nora." She looked at Pete. This man who had stood up for her at the dance and stood up for her today, who had helped her father build the chimney she still used, who had brought his horses to her for a decade without ever making her feel like anything other than the right person for the job. "Thank you, Pete," she said. "Your father would have done the same for my kids," Pete said. "That's how it works." He squeezed her arm once briefly and went to find Margaret. Gerald Pratt left without speaking to anyone. She watched him go and felt not triumph exactly, something quieter than that. Something that felt like the particular relief of a weight you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten it was there, finally setting down. The forge was quiet that afternoon. She'd told her morning customers she'd be delayed, and by the time she got back and fired the coals, it was past noon and the summer heat was at its worst, pressing through every wall. She worked anyway. She always worked. She was halfway through a bracket order when Tyler came in at 2 o'clock. He'd gone back to the ranch after the session. Harker had given him the morning, but the cattle didn't know it was a significant day. He came in with his hat in his hands and coal dust already on his boots from the yard, and he looked at her working and said nothing for a moment. "You didn't stop for lunch," he said. "Not hungry." "Nora." "I'm fine, Tyler." "I know you're fine," he said, and she heard the echo of her own words from Sunday morning. "I know you're fine. I'm asking if you're all right." And she almost smiled. She set down the tongs and turned around. He was watching her with that look she still didn't have a complete word for, the one that was close to wonder and had something steady underneath it, like a foundation that had been poured carefully and left to cure. "Say what you want to say," she told him. He took a breath. "I've been thinking about what to say since about 5 minutes after I met you," he said. "I haven't gotten it right yet, so I'm going to just say the plain version and ask you to be patient with the delivery." She waited. "I am not a man who makes quick decisions," he said. "I left Colorado because I'd made a slow one, decided over about 2 years that where I was and what I was doing weren't the right things anymore. I came here because Jim Harker's letter made it sound like solid work, and I needed solid work, and that was all I was looking for." He paused. "And then I walked into your forge, and you were mid-heat on a bracket, and you told me your wait time without looking up, and something in me just settled, like a horse finding its footing on good ground. I didn't expect that. I didn't plan for it." She said nothing. "I'm not asking you to feel what I feel," he said. "I know you've spent a long time not needing things from people, And I know that's not going to change overnight, and I'm not trying to change it. But I want you to know what's true for me, because I think you deserve straight talk more than most people I've ever met." He looked at her directly. "I love you, Nora. I think I have since about the second Wednesday. I know that's fast, and I know it sounds like something out of a dime novel, but it's the truth, and I'd rather say a true thing plainly than a careful thing that's only partly right." The forge was completely still. She looked at this man, this stubborn, patient, hat-turning man who had bought her a pastry she hadn't asked for and walked beside her past the two-bit and sat on her coal-dusted floor, going through ledgers and ridden her letter to the post office like it was an emergency, and stood behind her left shoulder at a council session like he'd always been there. She thought about the door off its rusted hinge. She thought about her father saying strength is not just the hammer. "Tyler Quinn," she said, "you have terrible timing." "I know," he said. "I've been told. I am covered in coal dust, and I just want to fight with a small-minded man, and I haven't eaten since 6 this morning, and this is when you choose to—" "Nora." "What? Do you love me back?" She stopped talking. She looked at the fire. She looked at her hands. She looked at him. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "I haven't. I've been alone in this forge for 12 years, Tyler. I don't know how to let someone stand beside me without waiting for them to leave." "I know that," he said, gentle, not pressing. "I'm not asking you to know how. I'm asking if it's there." Her throat was doing the complicated thing again. "Yes," she said. It came out rough and plain and completely undecorated, which was the only way she knew how to say true things. "Yes, it's there." He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, and he held her face in both his hands, and he kissed her, and it was not a dramatic thing, it was a real thing, warm and careful and certain, the way his hands were certain when he worked, the way his voice was certain when he meant something. She put one hand against his chest and felt his heart going fast under her palm, and understood that he was as undone by this as she was, which helped considerably. When they separated, she kept her hand where it was. "The town is going to talk," she said. "The town talks anyway," he said. "Dorothy Hale is going to have an episode." "Dorothy Hale," he said, "can have as many episodes as she likes." She laughed. That same sudden real one startled out of her, and he looked at her with that near-wonder expression, and she shook her head and took her hand back and picked up her tongs. "I have a bracket order to finish," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He leaned against the side wall, settling in. "I'll stay out of your way." "You're never in my way," she said. She didn't look up, but she meant it, and by the sound he made, he knew she meant it. 3 weeks later, a young woman came to the forge looking for work. Her name was Sarah Pruitt, 17-year-old daughter of one of the smaller ranching families out on the North Road. She stood in the threshold with her hands clasped and her chin up, and she said, "Miss Vaughn, I'd like to learn the trade. I know I'm young, and I know it's not usual, but I'm strong and I'm willing, and I heard you started young yourself." Nora looked at her for a long moment. "You talked to your father about this?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. He said it was up to you." "You know it's hot work, hard work, the kind that puts muscle on you that people will have opinions about." Sarah's chin went up a fraction higher. "I heard about the council session," she said. "I heard what Pete Cassidy said, and I figured if this town could try to shut you down for being a woman who works iron and fail at it, then maybe the opinions aren't as powerful as they want you to think." Nora was quiet. "You heard right," she said finally. She put down her tongs. "Monday morning, 6 o'clock. Wear something you don't mind ruining." Sarah's face broke into something bright and unreserved, the particular joy of a young person who has just been handed a door they didn't know would open. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Miss Vaughn." She left. Tyler was at the bench behind her. He came by most afternoons, now sometimes with work from the ranch, sometimes with nothing but himself, and she'd stopped pretending she didn't look up when she heard his boots. He was quiet for a moment after Sarah left. "That was a good thing you just did," he said. "She's got a good jaw," Nora said. "Strong jaw on a person usually means they can take what comes. Like somebody else I know." She looked back at him. He was watching her with the look that she'd finally found a word for after 3 weeks of trying. It was the look of a man who sees clearly and is not afraid of what he sees. Not the version of you that you present to the world, but the one underneath it, the one that wakes before sunrise and carries everything and keeps working regardless. The one that's been there all along, waiting for somebody to look at it straight. She'd spent 30 years in this forge, first as her father's daughter, then as her own woman, and she had bent iron and shod horses, and kept this town's world held together with her hands, and she had done it through drought and loss and cold, and the particular grinding weight of other people's smallness, and she had not folded. She was not going to fold now. In the weeks that followed, Kfax adjusted the way small towns do when a thing they've resisted long enough finally becomes simply true, gradually, without announcement, occasionally with bad grace. Dorothy Hale stopped positioning herself across rooms and started positioning herself near Bessie, which was progress of a kind. Gerald Pratt did not return to the forge. She didn't expect him to, and she didn't miss the business. Clara Hale's fiancé turned out to be a decent young man who brought his horse in for shoeing in September and said please and thank you, and nothing else, which was all she required. Sarah Pruitt turned out to have hands built for ironwork, quick and strong, with an instinct for heat that some people had and some people didn't, and she had it. Nora was not a patient teacher in the conventional sense. She didn't explain things twice, and she didn't soften critique. But she was fair, and she showed what she expected by doing it, and Sarah adapted fast. By October, Nora let her work a simple bracket on her own. She stood back and watched and said nothing, and when it came out clean and even, she said, "Again." Which in Nora's vocabulary meant that was right. Do it again, so you know you can. Sarah learned to hear it that way. Tyler Quinn took a permanent position at the Broken Creek, which was not something he'd planned, and was something Jim Harker had been angling toward since August. He came to the forge on Thursday evenings and Sunday mornings under the oak, and somewhere in the turning of summer into fall, a pattern became alive quietly the way the best things do not announced, just lived. One evening in October late, when Sarah had gone and the coals were banked and the day's work was done, Tyler sat on the bench against the wall and watched Nora put her tools in order. She did it the same way every night, hammer, tongs, files, punches, all of it in its place. Her father's system maintained for 30 years. "You ever think about expanding?" he asked. She looked at him. "What do you mean expanding?" "Bigger operation, another Smith. Sarah's getting good." "Sarah's been here 8 weeks." "I know, but she's going to be excellent." He said it like a fact. "In a year or two, she'll be turning out work you can put your name on, and the Harker Ranch alone could use a dedicated farrier. It's a thought." She put the last punch in its place and stood back and looked at her tools. She thought about her father's hands on the same tools. She thought about the morning she'd been 7 years old and carried mortar buckets all day without complaining, not because she was trying to prove something, but because the work needed doing and she was there and she had hands. She thought about the bracket she'd stayed late to finish for the man who didn't know she was adding a stop piece that wasn't in the order because it was the right thing to put in it. She thought about Tyler Quinn walking into her threshold with his hat in both hands. "Ask me in spring," she said. He smiled. The real one. "Yes, ma'am." She picked up her apron and hung it on its hook. "Go home, Tyler," she said. "I'll see you Sunday." "Sunday," he agreed. He put his hat on. At the threshold, he stopped that habit permanent, now that turning back, and he looked at her one last time, the way he always did, like he was making sure of something he already knew. "Good night, Nora," he said. "Good night," she said. She heard his boots on the path. She stood in her forge in the October quiet, surrounded by her father's tools and her own work, and 12 years of proof that she was exactly what she'd always been, a woman who bent iron, who built things that held, who had stood in this town's heat and noise and smallness, and had not once, not for a single morning, failed to get up and fire the coals. Gerald Pratt had tried to take her license and failed. The town had tried to take her dignity and failed. 14 years of whispers and committees and careful cruelties had tried to make her small, and every single morning she had walked in here and picked up the hammer and said plainly with her hands, "No." That was not going to change. What had changed was this: she was no longer doing it alone, and she had decided carefully and deliberately, the way she decided everything, that she was glad. Nora Vaughn closed the forge door, walked to her house, lit the lamp, and slept soundly. The sleep of a woman who had built something that lasted, who knew her own worth down to the bone, and who had finally, after all of it, let someone see it and stay. Strength had always been hers. Now at last, so was this.